Whoa. Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're tackling a big one, an administrative hurdle that honestly is a major gatekeeper for thousands of practitioners. Network credentialing.
Hmm.
And specifically, we're cutting through all the noise for therapy providers, PTs, OTs, and speech language pathologists who are trying to get into the Cigna network.
Right, and here's the twist. This isn't just your standard application. The real complexity here, the part that trips everyone up, isn't really Cigna itself.
No.
It's Cigna's very long-standing, very powerful partnership with American Specialty Health, or ASH. For so many therapy providers, ASH is the actual network they need to get into.
Yeah, let's establish that right away. ASH isn't some, new vendor Cigna just hired.
Not at all.
We're talking about a contractor that has managed this relationship for over 30 years, 3 decades.
And critically, they aren't just some random third party. They are nationally accredited. They hold certifications from URAC and NCQA.
And that accreditation is the key, isn't it?
It's the whole puzzle. It explains why Cigna would delegate such a mission-critical function. They've essentially outsourced the administrative rigor, all that adherence to national quality standards.
So our goal for you today is to really synthesize the critical steps, highlight all the required documents, and, maybe most importantly, show you the biggest and often surprising roadblocks in this ASH process.
Exactly. So you don't get stuck in that administrative quicksand.
Okay, so let's start with the basic structure. What does it actually mean when we say Cigna delegates its rehab network to ASH? What's the practical impact?
Well, the fascinating thing is just how absolute that delegation is. ASH acts as the official delegated network for Cigna's therapy benefits. We're talking rehabilitation services.
So if my patient has a Cigna plan that's managed by ASH,
Then you, the provider, must credential through ASH's system. Usually that's through their portal, ASHLink.
Mm.
For the provider, this delegation acts like a firewall.
a firewall. So you can't just go to Cigna directly and say, hey, please credential me.
Nope. You have to successfully get through the entire ASH process first.
And that 30-year relationship must give ASH some incredible leverage, right? It sounds like a highly rigid system.
It is. When a partnership has that kind of history, the procedures are just. They're deeply entrenched. They don't need to chase providers. Providers have to chase them.
Especially with the scale we're talking about.
Exactly. ASH has scaled this network to over 53,000 contracted PT and OT practitioners nationwide. A scale like that requires an administrative machine, one that prioritizes standardization and compliance over, flexibility. That history means the process is codified.
So any deviation, no matter how small.
It's a reason for a deficiency notice.
And I see in the sources that this process is only expanding. It's growing into new territories.
Absolutely. In 2023, we saw a pretty significant expansion. States like Illinois and North Carolina were specifically mentioned as places where ASH contracting is now the mandatory path for therapists.
So it's becoming unavoidable.
This trend makes it more and more vital for providers everywhere to verify if ASH applies to their specific region. If you're a PT or OT, getting ready for the ASH process is just becoming a cost of doing business.
Okay, that kind of scale, it requires incredible rigor. And that rigor lands right on the provider's desk as the core credentialing checklist. Let's dig into what you absolutely must have perfect before you even try to submit.
This goes right back to the accreditation we mentioned. ASH operates under NCQA standards. That's the National Committee for Quality Assurance.
Right.
And its certification basically guarantees a standardized, let's just say, unforgiving approach to auditing your qualifications. It's why ASH has zero tolerance for missing details.
Zero tolerance. That's a pretty high stakes phrase.
Yeah.
What are the specific documents they are scrutinizing the most?
They are looking for flawless execution in 4 key areas. First, your current unencumbered state license. Second, your national provider identifier, your NPI. Third, proof of sufficient liability insurance. And finally, a full detailed education and work history. If any one of those is expired or incomplete, the application is rejected, period.
The work history.
Mm-hmm.
In my experience, that's where most people get tripped up. It feels more like an HR review than a medical credentialing thing.
It is an HR review taken to an extreme. We have to really emphasize the critical need for complete disclosure, especially with employment gaps.
So if I took 6 months off to travel,
You cannot just skip that time frame. Any unexplained employment gap of 30 days or more has to be documented. You have to explain it clearly in writing. Same thing with any past disciplinary actions, no matter how minor you think they are.
because any inconsistency is a red flag.
An immediate red flag under NCQA guidelines, and that leads directly to your application getting stalled. Okay, here's where it gets really nuanced. the CAQH profile. It's supposed to be this great digital resume that saves everyone time, but it can be the single biggest roadblock if it's not managed perfectly.
So how does EQH interact with ASH? What's the mandatory checklist there?
So CAQH is a great concept, but it all depends on the provider maintaining it. ASH does participate, which means they pull credentials from it. But for that to actually work, the provider must do two non-negotiable things.
Okay, what are they?
First, the profile has to be 100% complete and recently attested. That means you've logged in, reviewed everything, and formally confirmed it's all accurate, usually within the last 120 days.
And the second thing. Second, and this is the one most people miss, you must specifically authorize ASH to access that data. So even if I've attested, if I forgot to check the little box authorizing American Specialty Health, my application is just dead on arrival.
Essentially, yeah. ASH sends a request, CAQH says, sorry, no provider consent, and ASH just sends a deficiency notice right back to you.
And that forces you into a slower process.
A much slower, paper-heavy process of submitting everything directly, that alone can add weeks to the whole thing.
Speaking of timelines, let's pin down the waiting period. If a provider manages to submit that perfect NCQA-compliant CAQH-authorized package, what are they looking at?
The target timeline, assuming absolute perfection, is between 45 and 60 days.
Okay, 45 to 60 days. You apply via ASHLink.
Right. But I have to stress, that window is entirely contingent on a flawless submission, and the provider has to respond immediately to any little clarification request. If you miss one of those deficiency notices in your email, the clock stops, and that's where you start accumulating serious delays.
That's a helpful benchmark. But the system is clearly full of tripwires. Let's shift now to some of the critical nuances and specialty exclusions that can throw a huge wrench into that 60-day process.
Yeah.
I think the biggest surprise in the source material was about a very specific group.
This is probably the most strategic detail we need to cover. We mentioned that 2023 expansion, right? Where PT and OT providers in new states had to go through ASH. Well, the source material explicitly states that speech-language pathology, SLPs, were excluded from that expansion.
Wait a minute. So Cigna expanded delegation for two types of therapy, but specifically carved out the third.
They carved them out.
Why? I mean, that suggests a very different strategic view of SLP services.
It does. And while the exact reason isn't stated, the implication is that Cigna views the, let's say, the utilization management or the clinical review for speech therapy differently than they do for the more standardized PT and OT services.
Maybe because of an overlap with behavioral health or something.
That's a good guess. It could be due to the overlap SLPs have with certain behavioral health or specialty medical divisions that Cigna prefers to manage internally.
So for an SLP listening to this, what's the takeaway?
The takeaway is you cannot assume the general rule applies to you. SLPs have to confirm on a plan-by-plan or region-by-region basis if they need ASH credentialing or if they need to use Cigna's primary portal, which is a totally different path.
Wow. Yeah, failing to see that exclusion would send you down completely the wrong track for months.
Months of wasted effort, absolutely.
Yeah. Let's go back to that work history requirement for a second. We said you have to list every job, but what's the level of detail they're actually expecting?
They are expecting a lot. Remember, this is NCQA certified. It's designed to confirm clinical integrity. You need a complete chronological history.
So specific dates.
Specific start and end dates, not just 2018 to 2020, for every single clinic, the full address, and, crucially, the supervisor's name and their contact information.
And if you omit a supervisor?
Deficiency request. If a date is vague, deficiency request. Any inconsistencies suggest, poor record keeping at best, or at worst, an attempt to hide something, and that stalls the application instantly.
Why this intense focus on the background check for therapy specifically?
I'd say it's less about them being seen as high risk and more about how they're classified. Therapy services, rehabilitation, physical medicine, they often fall under really specific utilization management rules, and they're high volume.
So this is about risk mitigation.
It's a risk mitigation strategy managed by ASH. The detailed history just ensures the provider has the verifiable professional continuity to meet that NCQA standard, especially as these services sometimes do cross over into other specialty divisions.
Okay, so let's recap. The system is centralized. It's governed by NCQA's rigor. You need perfect paperwork for a 45 to 60-day turnaround, and there's a huge carve-out for SLPs. Now let's talk about navigating this and staying compliant once you're in. What are the common failure points providers should really be looking out for?
The common failures are they're almost entirely administrative. It's not about the provider's clinical skill, it's the paperwork.
Like what?
Like the provider not logging into CAQH to reattest on time, or missing an email from ASH's credentialing department asking for a clarification.
And that request just sits there.
It just sits in an inbox for weeks. Or you have a seemingly minor work history gap that you failed to document, and that leads to an immediate hold on your application.
Okay, so given this whole administrative burden, a lot of providers look for help. The source material mentions using a credentialing partner. But if the process is 45 to 60 days when it's perfect, what's the real value of outsourcing this?
That's a really fair question. Look, if you're an experienced administrator, maybe you handle it in-house. But for a lot of busy practitioners, the partner isn't saving time on the processing side. ASH still takes 45 to 60 days.
So where's the time savings?
The partner saves time by minimizing rework.
Rework. You mean deficiency requests and having to resubmit everything?
Exactly. A good credentialing partner acts as an expert administrative filter. They audit all your credentials before you submit anything. They make sure your licenses are current, CAQH is ready, authorized, attested.
And they handle the communication.
Most importantly, yes, they handle the proactive tracking and the response to those time-sensitive requests from ASH. They also manage some of the Cigna-specific things that you might not even be aware of, like certain preliminary screening forms.
So they are essentially making sure that the 45-day clock doesn't stop and start over and over again.
That's the value. They're preventing a 2-month process from turning into a 6-month nightmare. They mitigate the risk of delay by getting it right the first time, but the commitment doesn't end once you're in the network.
Right, because accreditation is ongoing. You don't just get credentialed once and forget about it.
No, not at all. Maintaining compliance requires constant attention. Recredentialing is required generally every 3 years.
And a partner would help with that?
They assist by tracking those deadlines, sending reminders, and supporting you through that next review cycle to make sure your in-network status continues without any interruption.
And finally, just to clarify the fee structure, are providers paying ASH to review their application?
No, generally there are no direct fees to submit the application to ASH or Cigna.
But there are associated costs.
Of course. You have to remember all the necessary external costs that make you eligible in the first place. Your malpractice insurance, your state license renewals, all of that still applies. You're paying the operational costs of being a qualified provider, but not a specific application fee to ASH.
That's a helpful distinction. Okay,
Right.
this has been a really detailed look at a genuinely high-stakes administrative maze. To wrap up, what are the three non-negotiable takeaways you want every therapy provider to walk away with from this? First, you have to understand the delegation reality. The Cigna process is the ASH process. It's centralized, it's NCQA-driven, and it requires perfection for that 45 to 60-day turnaround. Okay? Number two.
Second, your CAQH profile is not a passive document. It must be complete, it must be attested, and it has to be explicitly authorized for ASH access. That's critical.
And third.
And third, if you are a speech-language pathologist, you are a unique exception. Do not assume the delegated ASH network applies to you without verifying your specific Cigna plan requirements.
So, when we zoom out, what does this administrative rigidity and this whole delegated system really mean for the bigger picture of healthcare?
Well, it means that therapy providers, who are experts in healing and patient care, must now also function as highly specialized administrative experts. They have to be capable of managing these periodic, highly detailed, and frankly unforgiving requirements from entities like ASH.
It's the cost of access.
It is. Given the 30-year history and the massive scale of this partnership, administrative complexity is clearly the accepted cost of ensuring widespread, quality-audited access for Cigna members. And this raises an important question for you, the listener, to think about. If a major payer like Cigna can successfully and perpetually delegate the complex task of credentialing a network of over 53,000 practitioners, what other aspects of core patient care and access, from prior authorization to quality measurement, are increasingly being managed not by the primary insurance company, but by specialized third-party administrative contractors? And how does that changing landscape ultimately reshape the relationship between the provider, the payer, and the patient?